Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonnell here.
Should be a really interesting matchup. Buckle up. If you're not watching, you got some problems.
Bobby Broyles and Tim McDonnell here for the Week 6 edition of This Week in CAA Football, presented by Geico. Conference play showed us plenty last weekend, and Saturday should prove even more with all 6 games featuring league play. First, let's look back to last weekend with 2 teams finding victory for the first time and in the process picking up 2 more wins for CAA Football versus non-conference FCS opponents.
Got to start there. Shout out to Joe Harrisimiak. First win as the head coach of Maine. Pick up the win at home. Black Bears had to earn it, though, over Bryant. It trailed 21-7 at the half, the old big Spiker Rooney. Before half, gained a little bit more momentum. 34-14 near the end of the third, and you're thinking, can they come back? They fight back behind Josh Mack, the freshman running back, had 3 touchdowns, 150-plus yards, pull out a 35-31 win. First win for Harrisimiak, but more importantly, first win for Maine this season. Pat Ricard came out a little bit on defense, 3 sacks. That was a career high in the defense, only allowed 35 rushing yards. Got to talk about Rhode, too. Shouts to the Rams. I mean, grabbed the Governor's Cup for the first time in a very long time, defeating Brown. That's the first win in the series since 2011. Harold Cooper had a career day, 133 yards rushing, scored twice in the fourth quarter. Both those rushes were over 30 yards. Hats off to the Rams. I mean, talk about a team that needed a win, too. We mentioned it last week. You get a win in non-conference play, moving into the thick of conference play, and that can be huge. JMU and Villanova both showed up. Impressive conference wins over Delaware and Elon, respectively. Brian Shore and Zach Bednarczyk reminded everyone how good they can be at times. Offensive weekly honor, for both of them, over 300 yards of total offense, and each accounted for 4 total touchdowns. On the flip side, New Hampshire and Richmond find a way to win at home. UNH outlasted William & Mary in the rain. Over 200 yards rushing, 35 minutes of time of possession, which is unheard of for the Wildcats. And the Spiders pull a fake field goal, scored a touchdown, and stopped Towson twice in the fourth quarter on 4th down. I mean, every team right now above 500 in CAA football has at least 2 wins at home. That says it all. That's a staple of good teams right now in CAA football. Got to take care of the ones at home.
Yes, indeed. And with that being said, let's jump into Saturday's games, highlighted by a triple header of television coverage at noon on the American Sports Network. Number 14, Villanova, welcomes Rhode Island to the main line. As you said, Tim, 2 teams that had a lot working on offense last weekend.
4 straight wins for Nova since that loss to Pitt, which seems so long ago.
Yes, it did.
That was in week 1. The last 3 wins have all come by 17 points or more. If there's any team that's quietly been putting in work, quietly been just moving things along, it's probably been Villanova in all of the FCS, I'm talking. Over 500 yards of offense last week. Bednarczyk, I mean, we talked about him, but 3 touchdowns passing, also had a rushing. Just looked composed, looked ready. 130 yards allowed versus Elon. 6 first downs allowed. 8 completions allowed for 33 yards. So the defense, I mean, which side of the ball do you come more impressed by? I don't know. The Wildcats are now 27-3 since 2011 when scoring at least 30 points. Rhode, I thought, in the second half especially, played harder and just wanted it a little bit more versus Brown. Showed up and just said, we want that Governor's Cup. Really nice to see the Rams, especially you think about Jordan Vazano, the 3rd different starting quarterback for the Rams this season. Didn't have the greatest numbers, but got it done. The run game helped, too. Obviously, having Cooper in the fourth quarter, those 2 touchdowns. It's just great to see the team celebrate, especially with the Governor's Cup on their home turf. Rhode, last one in the series in 2010. I don't think Nova, though, can afford to look ahead, and I don't think Nova will look ahead to that Richmond game next week. Still expect Rhode to keep progressing, but I think Villanova ultimately on both sides of the ball has a little bit of a slight advantage.
Then we go to Harrisonburg. 2 in-state programs clash when number 7 James Madison hosts William & Mary at 3:30 on Comcast Sportsnet. Safe to say the Dukes and Tribe are trending in opposite directions heading into this one, Tim.
I think that is safe to say indeed, my friend. And the Dukes passed the test last week. That was an early test versus Delaware. Johnson and Abdullah just absolutely kept on rolling. Number 2 and number 3 right now, rushing leaders in CAA football. Attempts, yards per carry, touchdowns, they're very, very close statistically. It's incredibly hard to prepare for 2 backs that average over 100 yards per game, let alone seeing what Brian Shore did last week. You also now have to worry about him running the ball. 607 yards against Delaware of offense, 398 of which came on the ground. Shore just keeps making strides. I mean, this season alone, 70 completions and 101 attempts, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Just getting it done. I think the progression of him, you can't overlook that. The Tribe, I mean, we talked about special teams play in the loss at Elon, and last week it did hurt. No Nick Dorka, no Hunter Widmuller last week, and it showed. 2 missed field goals, a missed extra point, 1 bad shank punt, but more importantly, 0-2 start in CAA play. Now you have to gear up, forget those 2 losses, and head to JMU. I thought Anderson ran probably the best he has all season last week, 160-plus yards, but that needs to equal out and only help that passing game. passed for less than 100 yards last week. Obviously, the rain had some factors to do with that, but expect JMU to try to keep up that pace, ramp up the pace, and put the pressure on William Mary's defense. Right now, William Mary, you can squash those 2 losses in conference play if you somehow are able to keep up with James Madison's offense. But ultimately, I think the pace of this game is going to take over for the Dukes.
Saturday's TV coverage concludes with part 2 of a doubleheader on Comcast Sportsnet at 7, talking about Stony Brook visiting Towson. The Seawolves had an extra week to prepare while the Tigers are still looking for their first conference win.
Very interesting game because Stony Brook's bye week comes after a sour loss at home to Sacred Heart. It's a good time to regroup, but it's also, you don't play. You don't have that momentum of getting back on the saddle. 2-2 overall, still 1-0 in CAA play. Towson now 0-2 in the CAA after that loss, a close loss at Richmond, a respectable loss. A week ago, I talked about, Towson's pass game is really taking over, and the run game just needs. And all of a sudden, Towson makes me eat some crow. 225 rushing yards as a team. Darius Victor, 4 rushing touchdowns, 99 yards, on the ground. Team only had 105 passing, so maybe a little bit of difference. Which team needs the more win in this one? Which team needs to find the win more? I don't know. Both equally need this one moving forward. 2 strong defenses. We know about the physicality. We know all that. Both rely on the rush defense to set the tone, and 2 offenses that rely on the rush attack. Remember, people forget, Towson started last year 0-2 in CAA, beat Stony Brook by 7, and then rallied for 4 straight wins down the stretch. I don't know if that'll happen again this year, but I think that is good news if you're Towson. You've been familiar in this spot. Stony Brook, like we said, only 1 conference loss right now. No conference losses right now in that win over Richmond, so you still have to build on that. But I think that's an interesting game because 2 teams who love the physicality.
Backtracking to the rest of the 3:30 contest, starting with the only game featuring ranked teams. Number 6 Richmond hits the road to take on number 16 Albany. The Great Danes, coming off the bye, are still the only remaining undefeated team in CAA football.
I mean, most impressive matchup on paper. It just, you look at this matchup on paper, and there's 2 things. I think, one, you're going to see a Albany team that obviously has found a lot of success rushing the ball. A Richmond team that the last couple of weeks, this is their 3rd road game of the season for Richmond. In the last couple of weeks, they've been getting everyone's best shot. Colgate and Towson and Albany, on the other hand, biggest surprise in the conference so far. No one argues that. 4-0 conference, 4-0 overall, 1-0 in the CAA. The last 2 weeks, like we said, Richmond has really fully understood what it means to be the preseason number 1 pick in the CAA, and I think that's only benefited them to be able to bounce back and find a way to win. I think about this game, and you think of Richmond's passing attack, which obviously is number 1 in CAA, and you think of UAlbany's defense, 15.0 points allowed per game. The Spiders average 30.8 points per game. Something has to give there. Elijah Biddick-Hanks has been the rushing leader in CAA football. We haven't seen him for a couple of weeks because of the bye, but the ground attack versus the Spiders D, something to keep an eye on. Nevin Sussman only averages 96.5 passing yards per game. Richmond's pass defense has been number 1 in the CAA, 125.4 allowed, 4 touchdowns all season long. That's going to be it to me. UAlbany's D has been great this far in the season. They've been forcing turnovers at key moments. They've been coming up clutch. But I expect Lauletta and company to try and move the ball through the air. We talk about Xavier Goodall, Tyler Wilkins, Garrett Hudson. All 3 of those guys have really, really stepped up, especially over the last 2 games on offense. The Danes have played a chip on their shoulder all season long, and that 4-0, I don't think they're feeling like they get enough respect. But you'll have the chance to prove it this week. This is the biggest test both teams are probably going to face so far. One of these teams is going to come out and be able to move forward and dictate what it wants to do. The other one's going to have to really figure out where it's at.
Yeah, you have to think right now Richmond's a little more battle-tested than Albany, but yet Albany's coming off the bye, so they're going to be more rested.
We always talk about that. What is the advantage? We'll find out.
Also at 3:30, Maine heads to Delaware for the first time since 2012. The last time the Hens were at home was on opening night while the Black Bears searched for their first conference road win in nearly a year.
That conference road win came at Albany 2 days almost to the year, so the return of the Mac, I know that's been said and run-on jokes on that, but Josh Mack, a heck of a day. Like we said, 3 touchdowns, all in the second half. We talk about the old fake spike before the half to Micah Wright, bring the momentum back a little bit. Black Bears are 1-1 in the CAA. UD is 0-1, and we talked about Delaware's offense last week. I don't know if it didn't show up. You still rushed for over 300 yards, but you just couldn't keep up at times with James Madison's offense, and that's kind of what we expect from Delaware's offense because it's a slow, methodical, ground-and-pound type of offense. Talk about the first home game for Delaware since September 1st. 1991 was the last time that Delaware had 4 weeks in between a home game. I don't think that's a huge factor, but it's definitely going to be nice for the student-athletes to just come back to Newark, something familiar, come back to their own place. Maine's win last week was obviously big, don't get me wrong. first win of the season, but a win in non-conference play. But a conference road win can even be that much bigger. So really interested to see which team shows up, because both of these teams right now, you could argue, really need a conference win equally, and obviously it's going to be a good one in Newark.
Yes, it should. Should be another physical matchup on CA.TV. New Hampshire head south to play Elon to wrap up week 6.
The Wildcats have slowly moved to 2-0 in CAA play. The offense keeps coming together, and last week, in the rain, in the slog, it paid off. Time of possession factor, I think, is huge last week. 30-plus minutes, which is unheard of for a New Hampshire offense in the last couple of years. We saw Trevor Knight slowly try to make a progression. He came together with his feet a little bit more when necessary, took control of the offense a little bit better, 95 rushing yards, a huge 4th and 9 touchdown run before the half that actually gave New Hampshire the first lead of the game. UNH turned the ball over on its first 3 possessions, but still responded against William Mary to pull out that big win. And the defense, I think you just look at the way they played against William Mary, gave up a lot of rushing yards, but still slowly coming together and starting to figure itself out. Elon, I mean, suddenly needs to respond after that loss to Villanova. I think this is just a throwout game. You forget what happened versus Villanova. Gave up a lot of points, a lot of yards, but part of that loss, I think, is also how good Villanova is. I think that also has to do with it. The other part, I think, went back to the offense. 33 passing, 97 rushing last week. Obviously, if you don't have that same balance, it's going to be hard in conference play. But we're going to keep an eye on this one moving forward. Nothing concrete yet, but we're definitely going to keep an eye on this one. Like you said, some potential weather, some potential soggy play down in Elon. It is interesting. New Hampshire has already played at Elon, one of the few teams who's played at Elon a couple times. So I'm just keeping an eye on this one, like we said, throughout the week to see what happens.
I'm sure you know my weekly live stream speech by now, but in case you don't, CAFootball.com has all you need for Week 6 games, including TV clearances, info for broadcast in your area. Now, Tim, give the people what they want. How was your on-campus trip? Another one, trip number 3, as y'all headed up to JMU.
It was a great time. I know in the Berg, Mike and I got a tour of the JMU locker room, which was like a club down there. I mean, bright lights, just absolutely beautiful. Sat down with Coach Houston. We sat down with Khalid Abdullah, Cardin Johnson, and also witnessed Saturday's game, which was great, adding the fact that 25,000-plus fans were there. Just 3 trips down, hard to believe, but not much more you could ask for. Our latest Going Deep feature is actually out tomorrow. That takes a look at how far JMU's stud running backs have come from their early days growing up together in Newport News. A little bit of a different story, but I also think it's a unique story that needs to be heard. And just excited because really nice to sit down with 2 guys. Not only are having success on the field, but clearly after meeting them, having success off the field as well.
Be sure to check that out tomorrow. We'll see you back here next week. Enjoy the game Saturday.